most of the top 10 disorders that are responsible for deaths today, such as cancer and cardiovascular disease and stroke, which result from metabolic syndrome in no small part. So it's all about, I guess if you summed up the approach in a nutshell, it's about improving the health of the mitochondria. Ketones provide a more efficient fuel. Dr. Veach used to call them a super fuel.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Welcome to the Empowering Neurologist. We have close to 6 million Alzheimer's patients here in America, and there is no real treatment, at least in terms of anything pharmaceutical, that we have to offer them. And the question is then, well, what can we do? And one of the things that we've talked about so much on this program has been something called the ketogenic diet. And why might that be something we would be interested in, for example, as it relates to actual intervention in dealing with Alzheimer's disease? Well, we know that there is a primary defect in the brain in Alzheimer's called a bioenergetic defect, whereby the brain cells are not able to utilize glucose as a fuel. And the idea of providing these brain cells with an alternative fuel source, in other words, ketones, has been attractive because it may allow brain cells that are functional but not functioning to really come back online. And the first study that has come out was performed by Dr. Phillips. We've actually had him on the program before, where he described great success in dealing with Parkinson's by using a ketogenic diet. And he's going to join us today to talk about the use of the ketogenic diet as an intervention in Alzheimer's disease. Let me tell you a little bit more. About Dr. Phillips. Matt is a full-time clinical and research neurologist at Waikato Hospital in Hamilton, New Zealand. His foremost passion is to explore the potential feasibility, safety, and efficacy of metabolic therapies, particularly fasting and ketogenic diet, in creating alternate metabolic states that may improve not only the symptoms, but also function and quality of life for people with a variety of difficult disorders. And that includes things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. So I'm very excited to have him back on the program. Let's jump right in. Matt Phillips, Dr. Phillips, how are you doing?
I'm good, Dave. Good to see you.
It's great to have you back on the program. Many of our viewers will remember you from the time we spent together talking about the use of a ketogenic diet in Parkinson's. That was a great interview that we had, and I'll just say that since then, you and I were invited to write a book chapter on that exact topic, and we look forward to seeing that coming out of South Africa, wasn't it?
Yeah, Tim Noakes' group.
Yeah, can't wait. Well, you've done it again, haven't you? You've done an interventional trial called Randomized Crossover Trial on a modified ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's disease. So basically what you did is you wanted to see if getting ketones elevated in Alzheimer's patients might be helpful. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the article, maybe you could give us an overview as to why you did this and why you thought it might be helpful. What's going on in the brain in these patients that a ketogenic diet might have proven helpful?
Okay, well, I guess the premise that we took with Alzheimer's was that it's fundamentally a metabolic disease of the brain, specifically impaired brain energy metabolism, which just means that the neurons, the cells, are struggling to have produce enough energy to survive and do the things they need to do. And so there's quite a lot of work in that area, and it's increasing by on a yearly basis. And it just suggests that maybe the major problems with Alzheimer's are not the protein depositions, the tau and amyloid and so on, but maybe the major problem is that they're running out of energy. If you look at them, neurons in Alzheimer's they have about a 20 to 40% deficiency in their glucose metabolism, which is the main fuel most people use on a daily basis to fuel their cells. And another thing is that the neurons in Alzheimer's are insulin resistant, so you can't get the fuel into the neurons very well. And also, at the same time, there's a lot less insulin in the brain, 80 to 90% shortfall. And so this is what's led people to call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes, because it has features of type 1 and type 2 diabetes. But perhaps at the core of the whole thing is that the mitochondria in these Alzheimer's neurons are really damaged. They don't have their enzymatic machinery, what they need to produce energy is not at optimal function. And there are fewer of these mitochondria, and they're all kinds of funny shapes. So really, you've got, our view with this disorder was that you've got metabolism problems at the level of the organs and systematically, and also at the levels of the cell and at the level of the mitochondria. And so that's a complicated disorder. Maybe instead of a medication, you want to use a complicated therapy, such as the ketogenic diet.
Well, there are multiple things I think that we could unpack here as it relates to ketogenic diet. Let's start with mitochondria. And we recognize that this notion of mitophagy, or getting rid of defective mitochondria, and mitochondrial biogenesis, the growth of new mitochondria, is something that seems to be enhanced in the presence of ketones. So right off the bat, it looks like if Alzheimer's is an acquired mitochondriopathy, who knew, that might be one of the ways by which the ketones seem to be helping.
Absolutely. I mean, we know the mitochondria are damaged in Alzheimer's, and they're damaged in most of the top 10 disorders that are responsible for deaths today, such as, cancer and cardiovascular disease and stroke, which result from metabolic syndrome in no small part. So it's all about, I guess if you summed up the approach in a nutshell, it's about improving the health of the mitochondria. Ketones provide a more efficient fuel. Dr. Veitch used to call them a super fuel because they produce more energy per unit of oxygen and at the same time fewer free radicals compared to glucose. And so I guess if you had your choice between the fuels to fuel your neurons, you probably would want to go ketones, all other things being equal.
I need to stop you right there, because you said something that I think is really important. You said the top 10 causes of chronic degenerative disease or death on the planet are related to mitochondrial dysfunction. And we can, let's say, take that a little bit further, because when we're talking about this mitochondrial dysfunction, there's a lot going on in terms of lifestyle choices that can pave the way for our mitochondria to become dysfunctional. We don't give them a chance to regenerate. We don't give ourselves the chance to rid ourselves of defective mitochondria. Therefore, those mitochondria that are not working appropriately tend to reproduce. And a lot of this really relates to this interplay between inflammation, free radical mediated stress, and mitochondrial damage, such that ultimately there is, in the case of Alzheimer's, there is neuronal dropout. We enhance apoptosis, pre-programmed cell death, through these connections, through these dots that we've connected via our metabolic challenges, our metabolic dysfunctional lifestyle choices that play out in terms of metabolic disease, insulin resistance. And ultimately, what you've just said, I think, really opens the door for us to gain a broader understanding of the major causes of death on planet Earth right now. And it's not COVID. It's still the chronic degenerative, lifestyle-related diseases, which you made very clear have at their very core dysfunction of the mitochondria, leading then to increased free radical mediated stress, cell death, DNA damage, protein damage, fat damage, and ultimately, our decline.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm happy to do a little tangent for 5 minutes on it.
We can tangent away.
Okay, so yeah, if you look 200 years ago at the top 10 causes of death in the States, for example, they were almost entirely infectious. And this was in the setting of, this sort of Pasteur versus Béchamp debate, where Louis Pasteur was a proponent of vaccinations and attacking extrinsic pathogens to treat disease, whereas Béchamp, who's not as well known, was a medical doctor who advocated this concept of restoring the terrain of the body, which you could broadly equate to health, and that he thought that was better. Anyways, Pasteur won the debate for many reasons. And over the last 200 years, the medical model has gone along the lines of the Pasteur approach, and it's gone outside of infections. We try to treat all of the disorders we see by treating them as this sort of extrinsic almost as an extrinsic target by treating them with medications. However, if you look at the top 10 disorders today, so number one is cardiovascular disease, and depending on the country, it might be cancer. So cancer and cardiovascular disease, and stroke is not far behind, and Alzheimer's is right up there. You know, if you look at type 2 diabetes, of course, metabolic syndrome at the root of all of these diseases, probably, and they all relate to our lifestyle choices and the huge tsunami-like impact of eating probably a little too much, and also not getting the fat to carbohydrate ratio right, and on top of that, a lot of processed carbohydrates, but also some processed fats. And in my opinion, one of the huge things, as you just alluded to, is too many meals throughout the day, and plus or minus snacks. And so that keeps your body always in growth mode. You never let your body and your mitochondria rest and fast. And that's the key here. You need to do that because when the body goes into a fasted state, it regenerates, it repairs, and it improves the sort of efficiency and survival-like mechanisms of the cells, including mitochondria function. That's where they get a breather from the onslaught of nutrients, and they're allowed to sort of make themselves more efficient. And we've lost that in our current lifestyle. And so this trial, this Alzheimer's trial, is just a tiny drop in the ocean, and that ocean is creating a tsunami of metabolic disease, which is quite frightening actually, because it's coming, and you can see it in the top 10, and it's not getting any smaller. 40% of the United States is in the obese category. 13% have type 2 diabetes. Another 28% or so have prediabetes, and so this is a real concern. And this trial is just one tiny thing that's, we're trying to show that maybe if these other strategies can improve these metabolic disorders, not just Alzheimer's, but also cancer and the metabolic syndrome and so on, then maybe the medical model can change and meet this problem, because right now it's not going to meet the problem.
Well, so it is a small study, and you demonstrated, just for our viewers, that patients demonstrated in certain parameters improvement. Alzheimer's patients improving, who knew, on the ketogenic diet. We'll come back to that, but I'm fine to extrapolate because I love where we're going right now. And as it relates, for example, to COVID, who's having the worst outcome with COVID? These are people who are having energetic issues, who have metabolic problems, who have mitochondrial dysfunction, as you just said, and this affects their immune function as well. We induce senescence and compromised function of our energy-dependent immune cells. Lower levels of NAD utilization, for example, in immune cells correlates with severity of outcome with respect to, or it's been hypothesized with respect to COVID. So in a very real sense, the very same mechanisms are at play that relate to the development of the very diseases you mentioned that are at play as it relates to bad outcome with respect to COVID infection. So, gosh, we sure generalized awful quickly from your study. I want to get back to it, but I think what we're looking at here is this environmental evolutionary mismatch, whereby we are not engaging our bodies in the time of, as you say, rebuilding, and we're constantly in growth phase. And as such, because we're always in growth phase, we don't allow autophagy to happen. We don't allow mitochondrial biogenesis to happen, mitophagy, getting rid of defective mitochondria. And we're constantly simply building tissues and not allowing repair to take place and getting rid of cellular components and even cells that are defective. And, certainly there's a time in life, early in life, when growth is important. But for those of us who are about as tall as we're going to get and, reach the stage where we don't need to keep growing, we might be fanning the flames of abnormal growth vis-a-vis cancer in our bodies by constantly suppressing autophagy and enhancing growth, having higher levels of IGF-1, for example, at the cost of not having enough autophagy. So our lifestyle choices are extremely important. When we eat, how much we eat, how often we eat, how much exercise we get or we don't get. What is the role of restorative sleep as it relates to autophagy? I mean, these are important questions. And we're not off topic as it relates to your study by any means. We're talking about something that is induced by caloric restriction, for example, which is ketosis. And that is a time that allows the body to take a step back and say, hey, we've got defective mitochondria, in this case in the brain. We're going to repair those. These ketones act as gene expression modulators, epigenetic modulators, helping reduce this fundamental mechanism of inflammation, helping actually as well to restore insulin sensitivity, and thereby allow those neurons then to be able to finally utilize glucose indirectly through the enhanced metabolism of the astrocytes yet again. So, this is one small window that you've brought to us, but it's extremely valuable because it sure as heck proves a point as you confront a disease for which there is no accepted medical treatment, as you and I have this conversation. And I think I'm a little animated right now, but
that's good.
I love
where
you went with that. It's really exciting.
Yeah, there's definitely a bigger picture here, as you've stated. I guess, the way, just briefly touch, I don't want to talk too much about COVID, but, trying to treat it with vaccination strategies, that's a very Pasteur-like approach. And that can have short-term success, but in the long term, what the success, I guess, if you will, of COVID infiltrating the majority of countries in the world and doing the damage it's done indicates to me on a deeper level that, and people with metabolic syndrome are very susceptible to it, as you said, that perhaps we really need to think of the long term here, and that's about restoring health so that you're healthy, and so that a virus like COVID really won't have much of an impact on the body. And I think where we went wrong 200 years ago is Béchamp never defined what he meant by health. He said things like get exercise, get sunlight, and that's fine. But it's really, you need a precise definition. If we're going to bring this into the medical system, and the medical system can do the most good because people listen to their doctors, and if doctors had a definition of health, a target to aim for, maybe we could start convincing more of them to actually utilize these strategies, prescribe fasting protocols, prescribe ketogenic diet protocols, and so on. There's more metabolic strategies, as you know, Dave. So what we need is a target, and to me the target is impaired energy metabolism, not just the brain. Brain is Alzheimer's, but other disorders such as cancer, there's impaired energy metabolism, and the metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, there's impaired energy metabolism, and that ties it all together, and at the heart of that probably is mitochondria health. So if we actually focused when we saw patients on, okay, this patient has some symptoms. I can use medications to treat these symptoms. We're very not anti-medication. I use them every day. However, now I've done that. Now I want to try and actually heal the disease. I don't want to just treat the symptoms of the disease. I want to heal it. That's the key. And that's why I went into medicine. And sometime in medical school, I realized that's not what doctors did, which was a huge shame to me. And that's what's led me down this path. But, now we can actually, I think these metabolic strategies, we have an opportunity to actually start healing people. We know it can happen in type 2 diabetes. That disorder is reversible. Can we do this to an extent in Alzheimer's, which represents an end point? It's a much tougher disorder, right? It's an end point of a long history of metabolic disease, as is cancer probably. Can we actually impact those disorders? My gosh, if we could actually start not just masking the symptoms, giving people a couple months of life in cancer, or masking the symptoms of Alzheimer's with our standard treatments, but also healing the disease at a fundamental level, even a little bit, that's so exciting. And so that's why this trial, despite all the work involved in conduct a small study, but a lot of work, that's why we pushed through to see it to the end. And I guess the results are they're worth talking about, I suppose.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in 1 minute because I've had several thoughts. And first, I had a conversation yesterday with a Dr. Stephen Gundry, who has a new book coming out, actually just came out, called The Energy Paradox. And he, interestingly, in the book early on, I think chapter 3, is talking about the Hadza in Africa. And if you measure their energy expenditure in comparison to a typical person who does office work, the energy expenditure of these hunter-gatherers is the same. Raise the eyebrows. And, it's surprising. And his contention is that office workers and, people living in, our modern cities are using a lot of their energy via inflammation. The fact that inflammation is running rampant in our bodies is consuming a lot of energy at the level of our immune cells. So, it speaks then to the fact that when we are depriving our immune cells of having enough energy, meaning having things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, etc., that then our immune systems are less functional, and that might interestingly have a correlation to an opportunistic infection, which is COVID, in my opinion. Now, generally, we use the term opportunistic infection. I think it really got traction during early on in AIDS with HIV, allowing infections like TB, pneumocystis carinii to flourish because the immune system was traumatized. And I think the opportunistic part of COVID is it's taking advantage of the immune system being compromised by these chronic degenerative conditions that the people with type 2 diabetes and obesity and hypertension and coronary artery disease are immunocompromised individuals. Their immune function is not where it needs to be, such that they're chronically inflamed. We know these relationships exist then between C-reactive protein and risk for these diseases, and certainly correlations are seen with levels of this inflammation marker, CRP, and the degree of involvement with these various disease states. So, it's very interesting because from your perspective, here's how you can fix it. Here's how you can target that exact problem, in this case, in Alzheimer's disease, by recognizing where the problem is and dealing with the fire, not just addressing the smoke. So let's do this if we can, Matt. Let's do the nuts and bolts, take the study apart, and tell us what you did and what you found.
Okay. So this was a study involving 26 people with diagnosed Alzheimer's disease, according to the best criteria we have. And what we did is we did a randomized crossover trial, which is quite a powerful kind of experimental design, where you randomize half the people, so 13 people, to one intervention, such as the modified ketogenic diet that we designed for people with Alzheimer's. And then you randomize the other 13 to a control intervention, which is basically a control is something that you wouldn't expect to see a change. So in this case, we used their usual diet, but we gave them the standard of care, what people would normally get. So advice to lower the fat in their diet, and we gave them optional recipes for that, and also copies of the New Zealand Healthy Eating Guidelines, and went through them with them. So we randomized half to the ketogenic diet and half to the usual diet with the recommendations and so on, and followed them for 12 weeks. And we measured their Alzheimer's on a number of levels. We, of course, measured cognition, because Alzheimer's affects cognition. But if you look at the two things that matter the most to people living with dementia, they are actually not cognition. It is function and quality of life. And so we decided to make all three of those measurements our primary outcomes. The primary outcome as a child is the thing you're most interested in seeing if it changes or not. We also measured a number of secondary outcomes related to their metabolism, such as diabetes markers, cholesterol profile, and so on. And then after we measured them at the beginning and at 6 weeks and at 12 weeks. And then what we did is we did a washout where for 10 weeks, we asked everyone to go back to their pre-trial diet, everyone. And the whole idea of a washout period in a randomized crossover design is to remove all the effects of the previous 12 weeks and equilibrate everyone, put them back to where they were before. Now, that's quite difficult because some of these people, you could see it, they knew they'd improved on the keto diet intervention, obviously. You try to not be biased here as well, but, when it's obvious, you could see it, and they know it too. So, nonetheless, the patients were very good at reverting to their pre-trial diet. We tried to emphasize this is for the greater good. It's not just about these 26 people and us. It's about the world. And people are really good, actually. When you frame it in that context, people will do amazing things to, for the greater good. So, anyways, we did a 10-week washout, and then we flipped. So everyone that was on the usual diet, they went on the ketogenic diet, and everyone that was on the ketogenic diet went on the usual diet with low-fat, healthy eating guidelines and so on, and another 12 weeks. And then at the end of that, we what you have is a very powerful design where each patient is their own control because everyone's done both interventions. It's a powerful design. You just have to make sure you do it correctly. It's really tricky. You got to get the washout right, and there's a couple other things you have to do as well. But I think we did it as best we could. And at the end of the whole thing, there was a trend towards improved cognition. It was not statistically significant, but I think there may have been one or two reasons for that. This was right in the middle of a level 4 lockdown, the most severe lockdown New Zealand had. There was 4 weeks of that in the last 5 weeks of the trial, and what you've done is introduce 2 lifestyle changes. One is a lockdown, and 2 is a ketogenic diet, and a lot of people got really anxious with the lockdown and so on. So anyways, I guess the more important findings was that function statistically improved, and it was clinically significant. If you look, what that means is that someone can have an improvement statistically in a measurement such as function, but if it's small, if it's really small and not clinically significant, who cares? And that's one drawback of huge trials with hundreds of patients, is they can detect statistically significant improvements, but it doesn't matter to the patient. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Whereas in this, it was clinically significant. It was beyond what you would. It was well in at that range. And just as importantly, quality of life improved to a statistically and clinically significant level. And that was quite exciting because those two things, medications really are not very good at that. And this was only 12 weeks, mind you. It's only 3 months. And that was basically it. And their cholesterol profile improved and so on as well. We can talk about that later as well.
What do you mean quality of life?
Okay, so with each of these things, you want to use a validated instrument, like a questionnaire or assessment that measures cognition, function, or quality of life. And so for quality of life, we used a measurement that's been shown to have very good retest reliability, which means people who use it, there's not much variation when it's retested again, and even if you change the raters, although we use the same raters for every part of the study here to get rid of that. And we used one called the Quality of Life in Alzheimer's Disease Questionnaire, and that just consisted of a rater in a room blinded to whatever intervention the patient was on, asking questions about quality of life and documenting it every time. And it's quite a lot of time and effort, but at the end of the day, that's what we did. And the quality of life things they measure would be basic things like your ability to do tasks, your marital and other relationship qualities, how good they are, how satisfied you are with life. It's quite a good questionnaire and really gives you a microcosm into that person's life as to how much they're actually enjoying their life.
Yeah, and I think with people so-called languishing these days, it'd be an interesting measurement for the population at large. That said, let's take a look at this first graph. And what we're seeing here is it is a measurement of quality of life, Alzheimer's disease scale, comparing ketogenic diet, usual diet. Maybe you could walk us through what we're looking at.
Okay, I can't see the graph, but if it's the one in the paper with quality of life, basically you've got the measurements at baseline, week 6 and week 12, I presume, up there.
That's
and so what it shows is that after 6 weeks of both interventions, there wasn't a huge change. I think the ketogenic diet edged ahead a little bit, but there was a big improvement in quality of life relative to the control diet by 12 weeks. And that's not surprising that there was a little change in the first 6 weeks, because with these metabolic strategies, ketogenic diet, fasting, and so on, it's actually the hardest part is the start, because you're actually doing this thing called, you're forcing the body to adapt. It's adaptation to this new strategy. Remember, these are potentially very powerful strategies. The ketogenic diet's not just trying to treat one or two things. It's trying to flip the whole body's metabolic state and really recharge those mitochondria at the core. But there's a lot of other stuff at the mitochondria, cell, systemic levels, and the ketones are superfuels and so on. There's a lot going on. You don't just sort of start it and get better in a week. So basically that showed that, maybe people reap the most benefits in terms of quality of life in the latter 6 weeks of the trial. And of course, I always think with these trials, what if we had done it for 18 weeks or 24 weeks? Would we have seen even more improvements? Well, maybe, but...
Well, I
Whenever
want
you
to
do
also
that.
point out for our viewers looking at the graph that you start at the baseline at 0, and you see with the ketogenic diet it goes into the positive range, a +3, whereas ultimately with the usual diet there's an actual decline in the QOL or quality of life. So the spread is impressive, but the fact that it actually improves as opposed to declining with ketogenic diet, I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. Alzheimer's, this is Alzheimer's disease. This is one of the toughest disorders. I call it one of the toughest 3 disorders that a person can be diagnosed with. It doesn't get better. It just slowly, relentlessly gets worse in terms of quality of life and function and cognition. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
The next graph I'd like to look at looks at plotting the ADCS-ADL, activities of daily living, over the 12-week period and compares usual diet, which declines to -3, to the intervention or the ketogenic diet, which actually comes to a place of just above baseline. So maybe you can tell us what the implications are of this graph.
Yeah, that was a good one to see too. You always want to see a trend because with these things, so that's why the 6-week measurement was important. You have baseline 6 and 12. And what the control diet showed, unsurprisingly, in Alzheimer's is a consistent decline in function, and that's what you see with this disorder. Whereas the ketogenic diet, it basically stayed the same, didn't it, for 12 weeks? And that's really interesting. It means that although it didn't improve function, it may have stabilized it. And that is hugely exciting. I mean, people do not want to lose their function, the ability to drive, the ability to shop, the ability to shower, or go to the bathroom, basic things like that we all take for granted. And the fact that maybe in just a short period of time, 12 weeks, this strategy stabilized function is, that to me was the most exciting finding in the study, the function part of it.
Especially
and the ADCS-ADL is, again, quite a validated test of function in Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and I would like our viewers to think about what you just said and showed in the graph, that this is in the context that no pharmaceutical available to anyone on the planet can do this. There is no drug that can stabilize activities of daily living in the Alzheimer's patient, and yet this intervention, by making a dietary change, fueling the brain, let's get down to the brass tacks, enhancing mitochondrial function, whatever, look what it did.
Yeah, I think you said it well there.
I want to. I'm smiling right now because I'm thinking I have to tell the story. I've told it before on our
Go
previous
for it.
podcast. You know where I'm going?
Potentially,
About
how we met.
How we met, and I'll just recount the story. A boat pulled up next to our boat. The gentleman on the boat was having troubles with his water system. I grabbed my tools, came on the boat to help him.
This was in British Columbia.
Yeah, in British Columbia, fix his water purification system for his boat, his filter. I had extra filters. And he began telling me about his son, who is a neurologist studying something called the ketogenic diet. And he said to me, I probably, of course, wouldn't know what that was. Of course I wouldn't, because I'm a boat mechanic, right? And then I
That
said,
must have just been amazing for you to hear that.
oh, it was great, because I said, I've actually heard of the ketogenic diet. I get up from my tools and everything. I said, if you look over in our boat, you see that? That's a bottle of MCT oil. And I'm not sure if your dad got what that meant, but then I think he called you. And then you jumped on the phone, and you and I, that's how we connected. That was, wow, 3 years
Yeah, he
ago.
emailed me and said, I met this guy who's interested in what you're doing. His name's Dave Perlmutter. And I just went, what? And I told him, what some of the stuff you'd done. And that was just one of those serendipitous things in life. I don't know, I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson said that there's, you just... the best people you meet in life, the quote was something along the lines of the people you need to meet in life will appear in an unexpected time in an unexpected place. So I think that was just one of those things.
Any other doc that we could have been on, it wouldn't have happened. Another Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that comes to mind now that you mention it,
Go for it.
It applies to you. And it says, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail.
Yes, that's a good one. I 100% know that one.
Yeah, you are blazing a trail, and so many of us are following your work, and very excited for you. So listen, thanks for spending time with us today. You're doing great stuff.
Thank you. It's always good to talk to you, Dave, and thanks for providing this venue for us to talk, and so other people can maybe find out about these other ways to tackle these really difficult disorders. There's a long path to forge yet, but hopefully there is a trail being made, and not just, I'm just one person. There's many other great people in this area, such as yourself, and there's a lot of others. So I hope that, in 20 years, we actually have a combined medical and metabolic strategy to approaching these things in medicine. And it would just be exciting if we could actually start not just treating symptoms, but healing.
You bet. All right, Matt, good to see you. We'll talk soon.
Take care, Dave.
Bye-bye. Well, that was interesting, wasn't it? The use of the ketogenic diet as a treatment intervention with success in Alzheimer's disease. Again, this is the idea of giving the brain an alternative fuel source when the brain is ostensibly less likely to be able to utilize glucose for a number of reasons. Now we give the brain ketones, and we saw the results today. Well, thank you for joining me here on The Empowering Neurologist. I'll be back soon. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter. Bye for now.